So thank you so much. So hello everyone, and thank you for coming along today. So I'm going to talk to you a bit about this new display, Women on the Rocks, and a little bit about the actual projects itself and how we went about doing the research and what the future of the project is as well. So this project was an exhibition co-produced with members of the Geological Society of Glasgow and GeoNatter, and also paleontologist and writer Elsa Panciaroli and Anne Cameron from the National Library of Scotland and Anne Ainsworth from Glasgow Museum. So we had an absolutely fantastic group involved with this. And it was a really, really great collaborative project. And it was really interesting to work with this group and just see what things interested them. But first of all, I'm just going to talk a little bit about why we actually did this exhibition. So what is the point in us highlighting these women in geology? So this image on the left is the display in Kelvin Hall in the Avenue, which you can go and see. But the real reason we did this is just that when you look at the history of geology in Scotland, it's pretty much told through the stories of lots of men. You know, there's people like James Hutton, who is incredibly famous. But we have had so many pioneering women geologists who have made significant contributions to our understanding of geology and earth processes. But because it has been told through the kind of narratives of these men, a lot of these women and their contributions have basically gone unnoticed or have been forgotten and just lost to history. And there's a lot of reasons for why this is, but when you look back to the sort of 18th and 19th centuries, you have the Industrial Revolution, and that brought about a lot of change within Britain and our societies, including things like the division of labour and gender roles. So it was kind of typical for men to go and work, you know, in the kind of physical labour, and women were more expected to sort of stay at home, be housewives, attend to children and things like that. And it's quite wild when you think about how, you know, up until quite recently, society as a whole didn't actually support ambitions of women. And it meant that if they had an interest in geology and wanted to pursue that, they really had to try, you know, exponentially harder than their male contemporaries to get access to education and to be able to actually pursue this as a job or as a passion. And one of the things that these early female scientists did have in common, though, is that they were often born or married into influential or wealthy families. And that meant that the women could work for, you know, little pay or often no pay, working voluntarily. So obviously there is many women that wouldn't have been afforded that level of privilege. So it is important to highlight that although these women were incredibly remarkable, they did have this level of privilege that a lot of other women just would not have had access to at all. But more recently, earlier this year, there was a paper that came out, and it is very, very interesting. I put a QR code in the middle. If you want to scan that, I'll take you to the paper, and it's open access. And this basically is looking at the public perceptions of geology. And the findings were quite eye-opening. And basically, the public think that geologists, we just look at rocks and have beards. So yeah, there is clearly a lot of work to be done. This graphic on the left is sort of summarising the paper. But another thing that I found really interesting is that, you know, a lot of people say that they think geology is boring, and someone who absolutely loves rocks, I find it very hard to imagine that you can make geology boring when it's one of the most exciting and interesting subjects. But also just that geologists apparently seem to be very bad at explaining to the public what geology actually is, which, yeah, so I think that there's a lot of work to be done here. And this paper, you know, it highlighted that, but it is very prevailing just within the field and the subject in general. So lots of work to be done, which is one of the reasons that we really wanted to do this project and to highlight some of these women. So I'm going to start by talking about Elizabeth Gray. So she's one of the women that were highlighted in this display, and she was one of the most important and prolific Scottish fossil collectors of her time. And she amassed collections that were so important for our understanding of early life on Earth. And her interest kind of developed from her father, who was a farmer near Girvan on the West Coast. And he introduced her to fossil collecting as a child, and she just continued with this passion throughout her life. And she actually still collected up until her 90s, which is pretty incredible. And she was, a very intelligent woman, and she was very aware of how important her finds were. And I absolutely love the pictures that you have of her where she's like sitting in the field, she's got her hammer there, and it's just an absolute classic. And we wanted to highlight her just because she is so important. And within the group, we had lots of discussions about her and how she's essentially the Scottish Mary Anning. So Mary Anning was a fossil collector from Dorset. Slightly different in that Mary Anning was from a very working class background, and she had to basically sell her material to be able to continue and to make a living. But Elizabeth was quite privileged in that she married someone called Robert Gray. So he was one of the co-founders of the Natural History Society of Glasgow, but he was also a banker. So he clearly had quite a lot of money, and she was able to continue her collecting and to pursue paleontology because of that privilege. But her work that she did was exceptional. So she amassed over 40,000 specimens, and lots of these got donated to the Natural History Museum in London. And it's really interesting because she actually sold the collection to them, and we don't know whether she was just very aware of how important they were, and that, if she kept the collection together and it was sold for a high price, she knew then that it would be looked after properly and worked on appropriately. But she did work with, so her material was used by a wide range of people. There was people like the John Young, who was one of the keepers of the Hunterian Museum. There was people like Lapworth, who is from famous geologist who has a museum in Birmingham named after him. So there was a lot of different people that have worked on these, and her fossils were incredibly important because one of the things that they helped us do was to split the old Silurian period in geological time into the new Ordovician and Silurian periods that we know today. And today her work is still regularly cited, and it's very widely used. And when we were doing the research for the display and looking into Elizabeth Gray, we were looking through an old book on the fossils of Girvan. And as we were flicking through the book, out fell this drawing, which is pictured here. And this is of a trilobite that it was actually drawn by Alice, which is Elizabeth's daughter. And this had been used as just sort of a bookmarker. So we took it out and we got it conserved, and that is on display. So you can go and see that in Kelvin Hall. And what I really like about this is that it was like she was continuing that tradition. So her father got her interested in geology and into fossils, and she continued that with her children. And Alice was an amazing artist. So this is a pencil drawing. It's absolutely incredible. And I keep thinking it would make an amazing tattoo. So I think that might be on my plan at one point. But yeah, I just really like that it kind of shows that she was then, sharing her knowledge. And I absolutely love that Alice wrote quite a lot about her mum, and she talks about how during a Zeppelin raid in Edinburgh in World War I, they spent most of the night in a bank on the opposite side of George Street, and her mother, Elizabeth, put into a large handbag as many of her best sisters and would hold it and sat with it on her lap for 3 to 4 hours until the danger was past. She had some anxious moments during the war. So that just shows how much she really, really cared for her material and for her collections. And we also uncovered this thin section. So this thin section here was donated by Elizabeth Gray. You can see that it says Mrs. R. Gray, because quite commonly they used their husbands' names. And this is actually of something called a bryozoan, which is a colonial animal. You still get them today. You can see them encrusting seaweed and things if you go to the beach. And this image on the right is actually a thin section image of what this looks like under the microscope. And well, we all thought it looks very, very similar to certain Rennie Mackintosh roses. So you never know, was Mackintosh inspired by geology and fossils? I guess we'll never know, but it's quite interesting. It's absolutely cracking thin section image as well. And just a brief summary there, because I'm going to talk a little bit about Ethel Curry now, just because I'm bad for talking too much, so I'm trying to keep to time. So Ethel Curry was a Glaswegian geologist and paleontologist, and she graduated from Glasgow Uni in 1920, and then she also did a PhD. And she worked as the assistant curator of geological collections at the Hunterian. And she worked on like many of the fossils that were in the collections, but probably the most famous work of hers was her work on goniatites, particularly in the Central Belt and the Carboniferous deposits of Scotland. And her work is really important for stratigraphy. So even today, we still use the occurrence of these goniatites, which are early ancestors of ammonites. And we use these to actually correlate our rocks, so they can help us with dating rocks across the Carboniferous deposits. And when I was an undergraduate, I actually did an internship which was looking at all these goniatite localities. So it's something that is still being used today. But what is really remarkable about Ethel is that she was one of the first 5 women to join the Fellowship of the Royal Society of Edinburgh, and she was the first woman to receive the prestigious Nile Prize in 1945. And she was clearly very highly regarded because it was her male peers who nominated her. So this is pretty incredible for you know, a woman of this time. And these are some images of the medals here. And we have these in the Hunterian collections. And when she was working within the uni, she was very, very involved with lots of different societies. And she was at some points the president of the Queen Margaret Union, which was the sort of women's union at the time. So she was very actively involved. And we know that, you know, she had female colleagues that she liked to work with, and one that I'm going to talk about in a wee minute. But as I say, she was someone that we really wanted to highlight. She's probably a wee bit more well known than some of the other women just because she is more recent. But yeah, her work today is still super important to our understanding of Carboniferous geology in Scotland. But now I'm going to sort of spend the rest of the time talking about the person that I got really obsessed with, which is this lady here. It's Agnes Thomson Nielsen. Now, we had come across information about her in things like the Hunterian annual reports, but the most information we got was actually from her obituary. At that point. So she worked as a volunteer demonstrator and an unpaid curator at the Hunterian until 1910. But then she was formally recognised for her talents, and she was appointed as what we think was the first female member of staff in the geology department of the University of Glasgow, which is pretty incredible. And she worked there for 28 years up until her death in 1938. And she taught classes to more than 400 first-year students at some points, which is an incredible number. And she did a lot of work on mineralogy and crystallography. And she also made substantial contributions to geology, including writing scientific articles on igneous rocks, so like volcanic rocks. And she also made lots of donations to the Hunterian's rock and mineral collections. But up until really recently, we actually didn't know what she looked like. So this image here is from the University of Glasgow archives, but the text for our exhibition before we found this literally said that we couldn't find any pictures. We had no idea what she looked like, but I was absolutely determined because I refused to believe that she could have worked in the department for 28 years and we would have like zero record of her. So I kept going back to archives and just looking through lots of random boxes of material from the geology department until eventually I just opened an envelope that had nothing written on the outside and pulled out this picture, and on the back and it had Miss Agnes Nielsen. And yeah, I was very, very excited. I had to try and contain it because I was in archives, so you can't really be loud when you're in there. But I did go and tell the guy that was working on the day just about why I was so excited, because he was probably like, "Are you okay?" So yeah, that was only sort of like a week or so before we were getting it all ready to go to print. So we were very excited. And now that we know what she looks like here, hopefully we'll then be able to look at other photographs and find more evidence of her. But some of the work that we did to research her was, because we couldn't really find anything on her other than this obituary by Tyrrell, who's a famous geologist. I spent a lot of time, we looked through census records. So this at the top is the 1921 census records. And you can see that she's actually listed here as assistant lecturer in geology at Glasgow University. And we also looked through lots of old newspaper archives as well. And this one here talks about how she was working with Ethel Curry, who I mentioned as well. And she was working with Ethel to further arrange a new donation that had been made to the Hunterian. So those two clearly worked together quite a lot during their time at the Hunterian at Glasgow Uni. And there was also this article as well, which is talking about after she died that she left money to the Department of Geology, and she wished for it to commemorate the late Professor Gregory, and the income of that fund was to be devoted to research in geology at the discretion of the professor. So she clearly cared a lot about her field and about furthering research in that area. And this image on the left is me going to the graveyard to try and find Agnes's grave. So at this point, we didn't really know too much about like her mother. I just got really obsessed with trying to find it and carrying out my goth duties of going to the graveyard to find it. And yeah, we found it, and she is buried with her mother and father. And we knew a little bit about her dad from census records, but her mother actually died before Agnes turned 2. So she died very, very young, which meant that Agnes appears to have lived with her dad and her brother throughout her life in various bits of Glasgow. But what's been really nice about the project is that although we have done the display, we're still actively working on this research, because as you start to uncover things, things like Agnes's handwriting. So on the right here, we have some thin sections which were donated by Agnes. And you can see on the bottom here where it says ATN. So that's quite common for how she was signing off or noting that she had catalogued that specimen or donated it. So we can use things like her labels and her handwriting to actually try and, as we're going through the collections, find more material and hopefully more information and more context about who she was more as a person. And we've also found this book here, which is her catalogue of all the mineral specimens that she had on display at the Hunterian Museum. And it was an exhibition about, the structure of minerals and crystallography. So we've started going through the collections, and we're actually, be able to find some of these. So I think it'd be really cool to sort of photograph them all and do sort of an online version of what she had on display. And I think it'd be really nice just to get an idea of how she was visualizing things and how she was presenting them, because it's just really, really interesting. And the level of, the amount of specimens and everything in this book and the number of cases and things, she clearly did a lot of work and a lot of effort went into this. And in some of the Hunterian annual reports as well, there's mention again of how Agnes and Dr. Ethel Curry were working together. So there's this quote here saying that Dr. Curry had rearranged and remounted collections of fossil arthropods and other fossil material, and Miss Nielsen has made much progress in the arrangement of the educational series illustrating the properties of mineral species in the balcony case on the southern side of the gallery. So we have all these little snippets of information, and it's one of those things that I love, that it just opens up more questions and you get more sort of research avenues that you end up going down. And hopefully over the next wee while, we'll be able to find more of these samples and more information on Agnes herself. But just to finish up, I wanted to mention a really interesting archive resource that we were using as well. So we've been working very closely with National Library of Scotland, the Moving Image Archive, and Anne Cameron, who's the curator there. She managed to uncover quite a few geology films from the archives, including one which was a field trip. It was called Geological Rambles, and it's dated 1924. And in this, you have a group of geologists or geology students with Tyrrell, and they're going on a field trip, and it cuts to this bit where it says the only lady of the party, and then just shows a lady sitting on a rock, but there is no context to who she is. And that is really, really interesting. So a lot of the men are credited, but we still don't know who the woman was and why they felt the need to highlight her in this way. And also just, yeah, we're not sure whether it was a kind of meant to be a humorous thing, or they really were just saying, you know, this is the only lady. So hopefully we'll be able to find, because there's a part 2 to this apparently. So if MD anywhere in their loft or anything has any old movie footage and you might think you might have Geological Rambles part 2, then please do get in touch with us. But the Moving Image Archive, so film is not something that previously I would really have considered to be somewhere I would go and look as an archive or research resource. But sort of working with Anne and with the group, it was actually, you know, a really, really interesting way to look at things and to just sort of delve into that and see the kind of the way things have been recorded, because there is actually quite a lot of different geology movies in there, and you can view some of them on the National Library website, but some of them, due to copyright, you will have to watch them through the, like, actually going into their archives, which is in Kelvin Hall. But yeah, I just thought this was a really nice way of sort of illustrating that, you know, it's not just looking at the kind of paper archives, and we can look at things like these film archives, and also looking at things like her handwriting and just evidence from the collections themselves to try and piece that together. But just to finish up, just a slight plug for other events we've got going on for the Geology Festival. So we have our GeoNatter sessions, and I'm doing some urban geology walks. We also have Rock Doctors, which is on the 28th of September, and we have an evening lecture by Dr. Elsa Pantaroli, who is one of the women that were involved in our research group, and she's going to be talking about her latest research on long-lived mammals in the time of dinosaurs. And there's a QR code up there. It takes you to the page with all the events. So I will finish up there. I don't think I went too far over.
No, that was perfect.